Back in 2007, Lexus launched a very important car called the ISF. And the ISF was more than just a car. It was the start of a new F brand. For the first time ever, Lexus, a Japanese luxury automaker, wanted to compete with the likes of BMW M and Mercedes-AMG. Now, the ISF was a pretty cool M3 competitor, but the subsequent models, the RCF and the GSF, never really got to the same performance levels that things like the BMW M5 and E63 got to. Now, Lexus is having a bit of a rethink for 2021. The F brand is going to move up market, gaining power from what it's had in the past, leaving the 5-liter V8 engine that debuted in the ISF as a bit of an orphan. Lexus wanted to give that car one final send-off, but they couldn't do it as an F model. They just couldn't get the approval from the higher-ups within the Toyota Corporation. But what they could do is give it a final send-off as an F Sport model. So what they did was they created a new sub-brand that debuts right here. It's called F Sport Performance. This is the first model we're going to see from this line. It's called the 2022 Lexus IS 500 F Sport Performance. So that naming is really interesting. It has a number just like a regular non-F model would have, but it does have that great V8 engine. Lexus sees this as a competitor for mid-tier performance cars like the Audi S4, BMW M340i, and Acura TLX Type S. So let's find out what the new Lexus IS 500 is all about. So now let's check out the interior of the IS 500, where the first thing you're going to notice on this particular example is a lot of red. You've got red on the seats, you've got red on the door cards, you've got red under the dash, lots of red leather, plastic, all of that. Now, of course, you can get other colors, obviously, but this is just a really red interior. I honestly think Lexus would have been fine to put in the red seats, but I think it's just a little bit too much red with this red plastic down here, or the red speaker plastic. I think it's just a little bit too much. It almost looks a little bit cheap in some areas. And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just crazy here, but I think that the red plastic and the red leather doesn't quite match perfectly, but that's just me. We're going to notice here that the seats are actually the same ones you get on an IS 350 F Sport, so you don't get any crazy F Sport F seats like you would on like an RCF or a GS on here. Now, we've got a similar dashboard as well. Once you're done noticing all of the red, you're going to notice that this interior is actually quite the same as what you would get in a lesser IS 350. Now, when you go ahead and start the vehicle up, you do get a special splash screen that's going to read IS 500. You see, you get the graphic there, you get the car, and then it's going to say IS 500. But aside from that, there's really nothing different about this cabin versus a lesser IS. They really haven't gone through the trouble of making this car stand out in any special particular way. Now, it is a nice cabin. We've got F Sport here on the wheel with our paddle shifters. This is a big, thick steering wheel, so hopefully you like big, thick, chunky steering wheels. But other than that, the IS cabin is not my favorite in this segment. It is a little bit outdated. We did just get an update for the 2021 model year. This is a 2022 model year vehicle. We do have this new 10.3-inch touchscreen. That's going to come standard on all IS 500 models. It is a lot wider. The graphics do look a lot better. You still have the Lexus trackpad down here that you can use to control it. So I actually forgot that this was a touchscreen for a second when I first hopped into it. I much prefer to touch it, but certain things you still have to do down here, like to get to this menu, there's no way to physically do that on the touchscreen, but it does come in handy because Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard on this, so it does come in handy when you go ahead and use those features to be able to touch it. The rest of this is all pretty similar. I do like these nice aluminum dials here. We have heated and ventilated seats. When you throw it in reverse, you do have a 360-degree camera right there. You can hear it beeping away. We've got the nice analog clock here, and of course we have the really nice gauge cluster from the LFA that Lexus has been doing for quite a while now. You push this button right here on the steering wheel and it slides over. I like that functionality. I think that's pretty cool. And if you play around with the drive modes, we'll experience these out on the road a little bit later. We've got Eco, Normal, Sport, Sport Plus. When you change up those, you'll see that the graphics are going to change on the dial there from Sport to Sport Plus. So that's pretty cool as well, but nothing super duper special here on the cabin. Now, there may be some people out there who wanted to buy a Lexus RCF, but it didn't have enough back seat room. The IS 500 kind of fixes that because, of course, this is a four-door vehicle. Now, the legroom back here is not immense. Lexus is going to say you get 32.2 inches of legroom. As you can see, I have just a little bit of legroom left. I'm only 5'9" on a good day, but that's because this seat is pushed back. You know, it does the thing where the seat comes back as you turn the car off. So you do get a little bit more room than that. Lexus is going to say you get a lot more legroom up front, 44.8 inches. So combined, you get 79 cubic feet of space, which is actually a little bit more than what you'll get in the Genesis G70 or Acura TLX if you combine the front legroom. But if you're looking at just rear leg space, the Lexus IS has a little bit less than those models. All right, so now it's time to get the Lexus IS 500F Sport Performance, geez, that name is long, out on the road. And I want to begin by delivering to you my initial driving impressions of this car. When I first hopped into it, you know, didn't push it hard, was just doing normal commuting in traffic. I really thought that the IS 500 was boring. No, don't tune off the video. Don't tune off the video. I promise we're going to get into the performance of this car a little bit later on, but I first want to just talk about what it's like to drive every day, because honestly, aside from, you know, a little bit of a rumble, you know, from the V8 that you hear when you're driving along normally, this feels almost identical to a Lexus IS 350 F Sport. It is extremely comfortable. The ride is very soft, even if you put the suspension in its firm mode with the Sport or Sport Plus settings. The transmission really wants to seek top gear all the time, so you're always cruising at like 1500 RPM and you basically don't even hear the engine all the time. It's quiet, it's comfortable. I really do love this car as a daily driver. The IS is just a very comfortable car, but I was very disappointed that they didn't give the IS 500 sort of that hard edge, you know, that it deserves, you know. But again, this is not an F product. This is an F Sport Performance. They had to create an entirely new sub-brand that will eventually spawn more models for this car. So let's talk about what you do get in terms of performance. You get the 5-liter naturally aspirated V8 engine, quad cam, 32 valve. We're very familiar with this engine. It debuted, you know, more than a decade ago in the Lexus ISF. It's since gone on to be used in the RCF, the GSF, and the LC 500, which is probably my favorite application of it. Here it produces 472 horsepower, 395 pound-feet of torque, all going out to the rear wheels through an 8-speed automatic transmission, and you do get a Torsen limited slip differential. Now we're going to go ahead and put it into Sport Plus mode, and we're going to talk about how that power gets delivered. So I'm going to slow down here. We're going to do a little bit of a launch here. Actually, let's turn off traction control. More on that later. Ready? Woohoo! Oh, all right. So that's why you buy an IS 500. This V8, naturally aspirated, probably the last one we may ever see from Lexus. This might be the last brand new Lexus model we see with this glorious naturally aspirated V8. But there is, you know, kind of a reason for that. You know, these, aside from being inefficient, you know, it's a naturally aspirated V8, the power delivery here is super weird. You don't hit peak power until 7,100 RPM, so that you have to get it all the way up to the red line to hit peak power. Peak torque is kind of the same thing. You don't get that until 4,800 RPM. So my big problem with the IS 500 is that in normal driving circumstances, you're just driving along, automatic mode. Oh, there's a yellow light, I gotta make it. Nope, I missed it. It took too long for when I put my foot down for the transmission to realize, oh, he wants, 3 lower gears. I've got to swap all these cogs. I got to give him the power, and if you're in normal mode, I was in Sport Plus mode just there. In normal mode, it's impossible. You're going to miss the gap. You're going to miss the yellow light every single time. I'm in normal mode right now. I'm going to put my foot down. Now I have power. I swear to you, that was the delay in automatic mode. That is not me, trying to trick the car or whatever. It just really isn't tuned to be awake all the time, even if you put it in Sport Plus mode. Now, what you can do is slap the transmission over into manual mode, and this is something I rarely do in automatic cars. Typically, when I drive a performance-minded car with an automatic, not a dual clutch, just a regular automatic, I rarely ever use the paddles because I don't think there's too much of a point. But if you'll notice, I know you couldn't see the tachometer when I did that launch before, it wasn't letting me get to that 7,100 RPM red line. It was short shifting, and I'm not really sure why. It's in Sport Plus mode. They just didn't make that mode aggressive enough. But everything I said about this car, it's sleepy, it's not that fast, whatever, fades into obscurity if you drive it like a maniac on the ragged edge in manual mode. So now I've turned around, I've got the car in manual mode. Now let's see what this car feels like if I drive it the way, maybe like a racing car driver would. I'm no racing car driver, but let's experiment here. Oh, that's it. Now I've got an IS 500. When you're driving it, oh, yes, the gear shifts are not the quickest in the world. This 8-speed, nowhere near as good as some of the best 8-speeds on the market, nor is it as good as Lexus's 10-speed that's in the IS LC 500, but, oh, you can steer it on throttle. Woohoo! You can put your foot down. This car is like a razor blade on the throttle. The throttle is so accurate at the high RPMs. You can control the car so well just by putting in a little bit more throttle input. The steering is sharp. It's really good. The IS is actually really good for that. I think this might even be better than most BMW 3 Series, maybe with the exception of the M3. But yes, now that I'm driving the car in manual mode, and you do have to drive it in manual mode, it's letting me get to that red line. It's letting me have fun with the V8. The rear end is playful, but it's still comfortable. It's not a track car. I rode around this car on a track with a race car driver at the wheel, and it still leans a lot. So if you're gonna do some track work with this car, I recommend maybe some stiffer suspension, bushings, whatever you're gonna do to it. But it is a really compliant daily driver, and you can just catch that body lean, control it on the throttle. Whew, it is fantastic. Now, I think it's a bit weird that you have to drive the car like this for it to be enjoyable, but once you do, it's actually really good. And, I've been using the paddles this whole time, but I decided to experiment a little bit the other day and use this shifter down here, and it kind of, you slap it around, it kind of feels like you're driving a manual transmission car. And I don't want to be this automotive journalist because I know this is cliche at this point. This car would have been great with a manual transmission. Listen, slap it. Slap it. Oh, I really love just the ability to, slap there on the gate. I like that you can do both, with the transmission or with the paddles. And once you do that, it's great. And I will mention, interestingly enough, that this V8 engine that you're hearing is not just the V8. It's really quiet in here. So they have put in the active sound control, the same stuff they put in like a UX hybrid crossover. And you get this little dial here on the side here, and you can turn that up or you can turn that down. So it pumps in just a little bit more engine noise. So I'm gonna try and see if you can hear the difference on camera. Listen. It's kind of interesting. So I think it just adds like a little bit of filler into it. You can still hear the V8 without it, but it definitely makes it a fuller, richer sound. I tend to like it. If you don't like fake noise, guess what? You can turn it fully off and you won't have to hear it at all. But But the one thing I did want to mention as well, I turned off the traction control for this video. It never lets you fully defeat it. I don't think there's a way. There might be a way, like a secret way, to disable the stability control, but it's not easy enough to do, and I'm sure that you can't really turn it fully off. So again, this is not a track car, it's not an F model, but they've created a new thing here with F Sport Performance. A really beautiful sounding engine, extremely comfortable daily drivability, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else we're gonna get from the F Sport Performance brand once this V8 engine is gone, because I think the V8 kind of makes the car right now. I don't think that the IS 350 feels like that special a car with a V6, and you are gonna pay a penalty for this V8, like I said, 16 mpg in the city, 24 on the highway, 19 combined. I've been driving like a lunatic, but I'm still getting 16 mpg. I figure if you really hypermile this car, you could maybe get high 20s mpg on the highway, because again, it cruises around, it loafs around, you know, very quietly most of the time. So think of the IS 500 definitely not as a competitor for an M3 or a C63, but way more along the lines of an Acura TLX Type S, a BMW M340i, or an Audi S4. So let's sum up our time with the 2022 Lexus IS 500 F Sport Performance. I definitely thought that this was a sleepy car when I first hopped into it. I didn't think it felt like a true sports sedan, but that just means it's a really comfortable daily driver that I think most people will enjoy. And when you want to drive it like a maniac, you slap it into manual mode and this car becomes like an American muscle car, which is a really cool parallel between the two. Now, pricing is interesting on this model here. It's going to start at $56,500, pretty well optioned, but you do have to add some things to make it a little bit nicer. If you want the premium grade, that's going to be $61,000, and the launch edition, which is a limited model, is $67,400, which is really quite expensive in this segment. The Lexus IS 500 comes in above options like the BMW M340i, Acura TLX Type S. Even the German options are actually a little bit less expensive than this, although I guess you do have to add a lot of options to those to make them very nicely equipped as well. This is a one-of-a-kind car, the IS 500, because nothing else in this segment has a naturally aspirated V8. So if that's what you're looking at and you really love the reliability of a Lexus model, this is something you're probably going to want to consider, and the V8 does give it a very unique driving character. Now, the exterior looks really cool, but the interior is a little bit dated, so I might consider one of the German options if you want the best technology inside, but at least for right now, I think the IS 500 just makes an interesting case for itself with that engine, because there is nothing else remotely like this in the segment at this price point. So if you love honkin' great V8 engines that sound great, the IS 500 might be for you. And if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the CarBuzz YouTube channel. We have more videos like the one you just saw of the IS 500. We've got the IS 350 as well. If you're subscribed, you'd already know that. Be sure to hit the notification bell. That's how you can be alerted of all of our latest videos. I'll see you next time. Bye.